All right. Many, many years ago, when I was still just a young lad, not there yet. But there was a group from our church that this was just kind of a thing that was organized. It wasn't really sanctioned by the church by any means. It was just a bunch of us decided we would get together and go on a hiking trip. Now, this was to be a genuine hike, like up a mountain in Colorado for a week. We weren't staying in nice cabins. This was tents, no electricity. We had to take in all of our freeze dried food with us. And in a backpack. I mean, everybody had to get a good backpack and get good hiking boots and break them in ahead of time. And it was an interesting experience for me. Took us 8 hours of driving to get to the beginning of our destination, and then we had to hike 6 hours up the mountain to get to where we were going to set up camp for 5 days. We had to tie our food up in the trees at night so animals wouldn't be tempted to get at it. And naturally, the bathroom facilities were, I guess you could say, natural. You took your little trowel with you and you went off into the woods to do your business. And all was good until I had to use the facilities in the middle of the night. So, half asleep, I trudged off to find a place. And when I was done, still half asleep, I started off and soon realized I had no idea where I was in the woods because I really didn't pay attention. I was sleepy, and I was just kind of stumbled out to where I was going. And anyway, the adrenaline rush of thinking that I was lost, of course, made me come awake pretty quickly. After panicking and thinking that I was just walking around in circles, I finally saw in the distance, through some trees, the embers of our cooking fire that we had used earlier in the evening. I was able to use my flashlight so that I didn't step on anything or trip on anything to pick my way through the trees. But it was the light that was in the distance, those embers, that made sure that I was heading back to camp. That's the power of the light. Light brings clarity and direction into every situation, and it brings understanding and even certainty. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that those burning embers were saying to me, "You'll be able to see your tent from here." There have been times in my life when I'd been on the spiritual equivalent of a walk in the forest, and I had no idea where I was going. And I'm sure I'm probably not the only one who's ever felt that way. In fact, we live in a culture today that is out wandering through the woods, you could say, surrounded by darkness. And we're getting to the point that we don't know who we are, where we are, or even where we're supposed to be. To be blunt, this darkness that we experience is self-inflicted. As a people, as a culture, we have turned away intentionally from the light that has served us in the past. just like the people of Israel did so many times throughout their history. Now, this doesn't mean that everything about our culture is wrong, but it does mean that we need to change our direction in many areas. The same can be said for our individual lives. Some of us have, with intention, turned away from the light and have begun to look elsewhere for meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And the result is that we lose sight of our certainty. So tonight I want to talk about the fact that we live in a shadowy world, a world that often seems to consist of more grays than pastels. And you can't count on just anyone to help guide you through. The government won't do it. They clearly don't have the answers. And frankly, I'm not always convinced that our leaders have our best interests at heart. Let me turn off my phone since that other one went off. You can't rely on the media to shed light on any situation either. They're not really driven anymore by the idea of let's tell both sides of the story. Whereas in the past, we had a pretty good idea of this is right and this is wrong. Today, that line seems to be changing constantly. These shadows are most profoundly felt in our personal lives. You can't live without a clear sense of direction if you want your life to have meaning. You can't live without a reasonable amount of clarity or without some sense of certainty. And you certainly can't live without hope. This is why, according to a lot of studies that have been done, today's generation is more pessimistic and more depressed than any generation in history. They live in a world of shadows, and the light is getting dimmer and dimmer. This may define the world around us, but it doesn't have to define your world or your life. Even though we find ourselves today living among the shadows, we can learn to walk in the light, where we see clearly, beyond the confusion of the moment, into the crystal clear reality of God's presence. There are three key ideas that I want to present to you tonight that are related to walking in the light. And if you'll keep these truths in mind, you'll experience the light of God in your daily life. And it'll make a difference in everything that you do. So here are the key ideas. First of all, I want to remind you that Jesus is the light of the world. Now, I know that you already know this, but we need to keep in mind exactly what it is that this means. It means that it's only through Him, it's only through Christ that we're able to understand what light is. In his book, The Case for Faith, author Lee Strobel tells about a meeting with Charles Templeton. In the 50s, Charles Templeton was a famous evangelist, often preaching to tens of thousands of people each night. He was also very good friends with Billy Graham. In fact, they even preached together many times in revivals. But Templeton began to doubt some of the aspects of the Christian faith, such as the reliability of the scriptures, evolution versus creation, heaven and hell, and so on. Eventually, he stopped preaching altogether. And then in 1996, he wrote a book called Farewell to God: My Reasons for Rejecting the Christian Faith. With the publication of this book, He was officially done with his ministry and officially done with Christianity. When Lee Strobel began writing his book, he decided to interview Templeton to see if the former evangelist could offer some deeper insight into his reasons for leaving Christianity. And as they talked, they debated some points back and forth. And then Strobel asked Templeton what he thought of Jesus personally. And Templeton said, "He was the greatest human being who has ever lived, a moral genius, the wisest person I've ever encountered in my life or in my readings." And then he said, "Everything good I know, everything decent I know, everything pure I know, I learned from Jesus." This is what it means when we say that he's the light of the world. Everything good we know, we learn from him. That's why Jesus said in John 8:12, he said, "Then Jesus spoke to them again, 'I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life." Through Jesus, we've learned things like love your enemies, forgive those who hurt you, seek to serve others rather than judging and condemning others, and on and on. Today, psychologists and social scientists are beginning to understand that this really is the best way to live. Loving your enemies, forgiving those who have hurt you in the past, focusing each day on a life of service, letting go of the things that you have no control over in your past and that you can't change. These are the signs of an emotionally healthy, resilient, and well-balanced individual. That's why Jesus is the light of the world, because his teachings demonstrate what a life filled with light actually looks like. Charles Templeton ended the conversation with Lee Strobel by saying this about Jesus: "You know what? I miss him." And of course he did. After decades of being an atheist, where would he ever hope to encounter that kind of light again? Jesus is the light of the world. Secondly, I want you to note that following Jesus fills your life with light. With all the technological advances that have been made in the world, airport runway lights will never become an outdated concept. Even with digital instrument panels, radar, and computerized landing systems, which could most likely get you safely onto the ground, all of this technology will only work up to a point. After that, the pilot needs to be able to see where he's landing. And the only way he can do that is with those lights, that little string of lights that run down on either side of a runway. It turns out that those quaint little lights serve a very vital function. Sometimes we get to the point where we think that the quaint lessons that we learned in Sunday school and Vacation Bible School so many years ago are really no longer relevant in the real world. But as it turns out, pop psychology and Twitter-endorsed wisdom can only take you so far. when it's dark all around you, you still need the light of Jesus to guide you into a safe landing. And the good news is that you can count on him to be there. Isaiah says in Isaiah 60:19, the sun will no longer be your light by day, and the brightness of the moon will not shine on you. But the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your splendor. To experience his everlasting light means two things. It means that we spend time in his word, learning to live according to his teachings. And it also means spending time in his presence. When you read Scripture, especially the Gospels, and you immerse yourself in his teachings, you'll learn how to live a light-filled life. You'll learn certain principles, such as when you lay burdens at his feet, he'll give you comfort and rest. When you come to him with your sin, he'll cover you with forgiveness. When you humble yourself before him, he will lift you up. When you give, he makes sure that it's given back to you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. When you spend time in his word, you see life as he means you to see it, according to the light of his truth. And when you spend time with him personally, in his presence, when you walk with him and talk with him and tell him everything that's on your mind, his presence fills your life with light. Psalm 89:15 says, happy are the people who know the joyful shout, Yahweh. They walk in the light of your presence. The New Living Translation says it this way, happy are those who hear the joyful call to worship, for they will walk in the light of your presence, Lord. If you feel like your life has become overcast and dark, here's how you can begin to find your way back into the sunlight. Spend more time in the Word each day, and spend more time in the presence of the Lord. Because he's ready to welcome you at any hour of the day or night. He'll never turn his back on you, and he will lead you into the light. And here's the third idea that I want to bring to your attention. When your life is filled with the light of Christ, others will be drawn to the light. Jesus said something in the Sermon on the Mount that confused me when I was younger. If I'd been in the crowd that day, I might have raised my hand and said, hey, wait a minute, I got a question. So what did he say? He said, you are the light of the world. Now, my response would have been, no, Jesus, you are the light of the world. Because he is, of course. But here's what he wants us to know. Yes, he's the light of the world. And when you follow the light, you become the light to those around you. Now, to be technical about it, I should probably say that you become a reflector of the light, and people are then drawn to that light. I've told you before that I grew up in the church, but I've known a lot of folks that didn't. I've known people who never went to church. So how did they then come to know Christ? It's because there was someone in their life that reflected God's light. There was something about these Christians that was different. And eventually, the Christ that was reflected in what they did or what they said had an eternal effect on some of the people around them, to the point that they wanted what these other people, what these Christians had. I would imagine in a group our size, Some of you know exactly what it is that I'm talking about. You were drawn to Christ first because you saw something in someone else. And that's what happens. People see the light and they're drawn to the light. And it's almost unavoidable. You can't help but see the light of Christ in others. And when you see it, you're naturally drawn to it. 1 John 1:7 says, "But if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another." In other words, we're drawn to the light that we see in others, and it becomes our common ground, if you will. And then John goes on to say, "And the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin." In other words, when we walk in the light of Christ, we experience the fullness of his mercy and his grace in our lives. Therefore, we should, as Jesus says, in the same way, let your light shine before men, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Imagine, if you will, that you're in a dark building. No lights, no moon glow shining into the windows. There are 20 people gathered in one room, and everyone needs to find a way out of the building. All of the electricity is out. No one has phones with flashlights on them. Everyone is wearing dark clothes. The room would be completely dark, except that there's this one guy who's wearing a glow-in-the-dark green suit. Now, imagine how easy it would be to spot him. And imagine how people would be drawn to him, especially when they needed help finding their way out through the proper corridors or hallways to lead them out of the building. That's how Christians, that's how believers should stand out in the crowd. That's how we're meant to stand out in the crowd. Not drawing our attention to ourselves, but drawing attention to the light, attention to Christ. We live in a darkened world. People all around us are stumbling their way through the woods, doing their best to avoid the bear traps that are out there, while hoping to somehow find their way back to camp. There is a light that will lead them. It's the light of Christ. And if they will only come to him, he'll fill their lives with grace and mercy and joy and peace and purpose and power, if they will only come to him. But how do they find him? You know the answer. It's through you. He's counting on you to be the light for those around you. He is the light of the world. Those who follow him will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That means, as amazing as it is to hear, that you also, and these are in His words, are the light of the world. Because when you follow the light of Jesus, you become the light of Jesus in a world of darkness. And people are drawn to the light. And they will experience Christ's love through you. Take out your prayer sheets, if you would.